about this. And there is something called salami slicing, where, as Vikas sir told, you have 3 biomarkers in one study, and you publish each biomarker try to publish each biomarker in other different papers. But the basic data will be the same. So this also is a breach of copyright. It's also a copyright violation. And then there is redundant publication. The same work has been done. You're also doing the same work after 1 year and trying to publish it. You're copying the methodology, you're taking the same patient group, you're doing the same type of experiments without any modifications. Then you try to publish it, then it again becomes a copyright violation, though you're not copying the same work, copying the same manuscript. So how can you avoid copyright violations? First of all, we have to determine if permission to reproduce is required. If there is, how we are going to determine is, we'll discuss this. Then once you determine if you think the permission is required, then you identify the owner. We just discussed how to identify the owner. We just look at the copyright symbol where it is in a manuscript, and that individual is the owner. And then identify the rights needed. What all rights do you need? Do you need an image to be published? Do you need a table to be reproduced? Do you need just a paragraph to be quoted? You have to decide what is needed, and then contact the owner and negotiate whether payment is required. Usually for academics, usually for scientific publication, payments are usually waived off. But there could be some journals which will levy some price for republishing images. Then always get the permission in writing. Now, since there is email, it has become more simple. People can just send you an email, and that can be kept as a proof. So you just contact the copyright holder. If the copyright holder is the author, you seek written permission, you email the author and you seek written permission. If it is a publisher, you can check the journal website for instructions as to how to check for copyrights. Or you could use automated websites, which like RightsLink, which will automate your copyright application. And or you could directly contact the editorial office if none of the other two are not clear in the website. So how do we determine if permission is required? This is the first question that we have to ask before we reproduce somebody's work. So here there is a doctrine of fair use, where there is a guideline for exceptions for owners' exclusive use of copyrighted material. So suppose the purpose and character of the use says that it is not for a non-profit education or part of a scholarly activity, like this presentation. I have used a lot of material that have been published by others, but I have not taken a copyright permission. So this is not a breach of copyright laws. Then the nature of the work being used. If it is fact-based or a generic information or a review or criticism, like now it is COVID era. So somebody says that COVID, this drug has been working in COVID, and all the newspapers on the next day publish it. So are the newspapers violating the copyrights of the author? No, they are not. It is a fact-based and it is a very generic information. They are not trying to reproduce it for financial gains. Then amount of work that is used. If it is a very small part of the work, usually it is overlooked by these publishers. And effect of the use on potential income related to work. Suppose there is a textbook that has just been published, and then you give it to a Xerox shop, photocopy shop. You ask that individual to make 100 copies and sell it. So this becomes a major copyright violation, because you're hitting into the actual publisher's market. So this becomes a problem, and there could be serious both civil lawsuits as well as criminal lawsuits against you. So to summarize, authorship means credit as well as responsibility. We have to decline gifts, we have to exercise all ghosts, and we have to uninvite guests when it comes to authorship. All of us have to be honest, accurate, efficient, and objective while we report our study findings. And copyright is the right of the author or the owner who has done the work. And while we do our work, we have to watch for plagiarism, duplicate publication, and redundancy. Above all, we have to seek permission if you think that is required before we use the above said work. Thank you.
Thank you, Changappa, for the wonderful presentation. Now we'll be talking about predatory journals publishing in black and white. So, as we all know, publication and academia can be an endless chase at times if you're trying to touch the horizon, which can be a never-ending game. We need to prevent ourselves to get to a state where greed begets greed and we resort to unethical publishing practices. So while you would be familiar with some of these unethical practices like falsification, plagiarism, conflict of interest, authorship, which we just talked about, not all of them will be as obvious to you as they seem to be. So instead of you going fishing, sometimes the sharks can come get you. And it is also important when you find a prolific scholar and you're like, oh, wow, they're publishing a lot. You need to view them through the prism of ethical authorship violation, which includes publishing in predatory journals. So, for those of you who are familiar with this Chinese philosophy, yin and yang, the concept of dualism, it also applies to science and here in predatory publishing, where these seemingly contrary concepts, you want to publish in a predatory journal, but or you have fallen prey to them. So it doesn't really matter because these are complementary processes. Eventually, the output and the endpoint is that you have published in a predatory journal, and people are going to view you through look at it through that perspective. So let me take you back a few years to this experience of ours where we had this young boy report to us who presented with high-grade fever, basically pyrexia of unknown origin, which went undiagnosed for months until we conducted a PET scan, and all his vessels lit up. So this was a case of prepulseless Takayasu's arthritis, which the fact that it did not improve with any therapy is another story, which we'll keep for another day. But we basically drafted a case report because of its unusual nature and set out on our search for an appropriate journal. And Professor Paul Bacon, late Professor Bacon, is a pioneer in vasculitis research, and he was visiting our center in Lucknow, and he found this case really interesting and asked me to draft it. So he, because of his eminence and expertise in the field, he had described various kinds of vasculitis and also various kinds of scoring systems. So he had been requested. He was also on the edit board of the inaugural issue of this journal called the Annals of Clinical Case Reports, which sounded like one of the journals from the Annals series. And he was requested to submit a manuscript, and he suggested maybe we could send it there. And we were like, yes, why not? So the first red flag came up when he said that the author instructions are remarkably minimal and they're available online, and I'm sending them to you. But the real surprise came in when they said that your manuscript is accepted for publication and we need to shell out 1,800 US dollars. So, so this was the receipt we got, and which was Remedy Publications, made us wonder if it's a remedy to all maladies. Uh, so, despite our refusal and repeated requests to withdraw this article, typically as a predatory journal does, this article was online within 1 week. And probably our emails were sold as well. Till date, I get so many invitations from predatory journals, which can be challenging to handle at times. So, it may be easy and it may be alluring to go towards a predatory journal where publishing a credible journal is like a series of short sprints or a relay where the first author is at this end as well as the other end, and it gets tired in this never ending process, while a predatory journal is pretty much like walking down is cakewalk or just walking down the red carpet, because they solicit manuscripts through email, they ensure speedy publication, and but the description of manuscript handling is usually not very clear. And in our case, two red flags were present, which we failed to identify, although they did not ensure speedy publication. So some of the features which can help you identify predatory journals is they do not have a Web of Science impact factor or a SCImago journal ranking. Oftentimes they can have unprofessional websites with dead links and grammatical errors. They often use generic email accounts like Gmail, Yahoo, Hotmail, or any of those rather than a formal journal ID. And they do not have a clear policy on copyright licensing, open access, or retraction. Sometimes they can charge either unusually high or unusually low processing charges, and they do not use permanent identifiers like DOI or ISSN. So it's not sacrosanct that each of the predatory journal would have all of these, but you need to be on the lookout for any of these, and it can be a permutation and combination of various factors. So this is an interesting report in Nature where a group of scientists who were fed up of various invitations which were not related to their field, they decided to go on this sting operation where they first created a fake scientist named Anna Oszust, where Oszust in Polish means fraud. And they created the sham profile where they applied to be the editor-in-chief of 360 journals. And in this interesting sting operation, 48 journals accepted. So let's look at Anna's profile. It had fake scientific degrees, spoof book chapters. The academic interests listed were the theory of science and sport, cognitive sciences, which everyone may be interested in, methodological basis of social sciences, and there were fake profiles in academia, Twitter, and Google Plus, which is no more. So this is an old paper. And they also created a faculty webpage at the Institute of Philosophy in Poznan, a page which could only be accessed through the link in our CV. So the profile was, needless to say, dismally inadequate for a role as an editor, and she actually did not have even a single index publication. She had never been a reviewer, never been cited, which is the most important marker, and the books and chapters were not searchable on any reputed engine. So who embraced the fake here? As you can see, we come down to three kinds of journals: predatory, titles on the directory of open access journals, and titles indexed for the journal citation report. So these are databases which list journals, and predatory titles can be identified from a list known as Beale's list, which we will talk about in a minute. So, and open access journals are those where the article is not copyright protected by the journal or the publisher, and the author has a copyright. They can be either gold open access, where the author pays to get the copyright, or it can be platinum, where it's sponsored by a society or some other organization. So as we can see here, predatory journals were the ones who immediately accepted, sometimes within hours, um, uh, this Anna Oszust as the editor-in-chief, and it was rejected by a few and no response from a few. While the directory of open access journals also had a fraction of journals which did accept this fake profile as the editor-in-chief, suggesting that we may view this group of journals with caution as well. While those which were indexed by the JCR came out clean and either rejected or had no response. So there are various whitelists to look out for when you're submitting your article. You don't want to fall into the publication trap. So there is the DOAG, and then there's Open Access Scholarly Publishers Association. There is the Committee of Publication Ethics, which we talked about. And then there are organizations which archive journal names for Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka, or the African journals. But blacklists are actually what is more important than whitelists, such as the Beale list. So this gentleman was an American librarian in Denver, and we have to attribute this term predatory open access publishing to him. He coined it, and he created the Beale's list, which listed all the potentially predatory open access publishers. So he also criticized the open access publishing movement and wrote a blog on it, and described the gold model and said that the gold and the platinum model are both prone to abuse. So he said that same editorial board for more than one journal. So these predatory journals can often flock together like sisters in crime, and there can be two or more journals which are of very obscure nature with different kind of topics listed, which with no geographical diversity among the editorial board members. The publisher may not have policies or practices for digital preservation. Copyright may not be mentioned. Sometimes the PDFs are logged. So once they're published, it may be hard to check them for plagiarism. And the name of the journal may be incongruent with the journal's mission, and there may be false indexing claim, which you can always cross-check in one of the repositories. So unfortunately, at some point, due to his criticism for the Frontiers group of journals, which is the open access journal, which is a strong lobby, he was sued by some of the journals because they thought they had finally crossed the line by assaulting the gold open access model altogether. Well, some of them are clean. He was sued by the Omics group in Hyderabad due to poor transparencies, and also it was very challenging to get off the list once they were there. So, but all is well that ends well. So Beale was eventually hired by Cabell, and now he looks after the Cabell's list, which is a paid list, and subscribers can get access to both black and white lists, and it is reviewed quarterly and 60 indicators, um, which are verified by a group of personnel. So this is not all. There are other lists like the CSIR and the UGC website in India, or the Stop Predatory Journals. There are many more which you can look out for. And unfortunately, India does stop the submission in predatory journals, according to this report published 2 years ago. And that's why the UGC has released a list of recommended journals to counter predators. And it's always good to check if the journal you're targeting is out there on this list or not, because you don't want to be publishing in a predatory journal. Identifying a predatory journal, once again, emphasizing that the subject may cover various interfaces. The editorial board members may not be traceable or may be unrelated to the field. There may be grammatical or spelling errors on the website. There may be distorted images. On the website, it looks unprofessional generally. I've oftentimes seen some blingy websites which have like a WhatsApp icon and the phone number given out, which is definitely predatory. And then targeted language as if to lure the authors, and then index Copernicus value can be used as a promotional tool on the website. Often retraction policy is missing. So retraction is very important, and only a good journal would have a retraction policy. If not, it may be a predatory journal. Besides, they may claim to be open access, but may retain copyright or fail to mention it. And then the email, which we talked about a few minutes ago. So there is this thing, check, submit list, which you might like to go over after the lecture. It says that you need to check how long the journal has been in existence, how extensive is the archive, examine the quality of research previously published will give you a fair idea. Can you contact the publisher, and do they provide transparent details of the peer review process? Is it indexed on one of these Web of Science, Scopus, or the other bibliographic databases? And ask your colleagues if they're published or are familiar with the publication. So go to a scholarly open access website and see if the journal is listed. Even when the site is not functional anymore, it may be possible to view its cached contents to an internet archive that is a Wayback Machine. Then we have the Think, Check, Submit, which is easier, and then the DOAG, which is supposed to be a whitelist, although that's been questioned by BA. So for further reading, I'll recommend this excellent paper, which give you further insight into this area, and open to questions, but at the end of the lecture. Thank you. Now we will have Dr. Subhash Yadav with us today. He's an endocrinologist at Sanjay Gandhi Postgraduate Institute of India, Lucknow, and he'll be talking about informed consent. Over to Dr.
Hi, good evening. Latika, I'm audible or not? Hello?
You are.
Yeah, okay. So, good evening to all. So today's my topic is informed consent process in research. So it is a little bit, I mean, out of the way what you are listening by last three speaker, and they were giving a tremendous knowledge actually. So today I'm going to talk about like how to take the informed consent, like in the research. Research means any kind of research, whether it is a drug trial or research associated with a small project with the MD student, DM student, uh, or even some observational studies or retrospective studies. And what is the role of informed consent? So like any like process, this evaluation of the informed consent come like in the research, it come with the early consent process practices, like what experience people have. And because of some infamous research, we see some examples, and probably you must be knowing also the some of the infamous research. And as far as the medical treatment is concerned, there also you required to have informed consent, and that also come with the like many time with the patient litigations, various laws and regulation has come after that. So probably we are aware of this like yellow fever experiment. It was done in Cuba following the Spanish American War in 1900 year. And it was done by the Walter Reed. Actually, he was a scientist, and he want to see the after the like mosquito, like inoculation of after biting of the mosquito, whether it inoculating the virus and causing the Spanish fever. And though the consent was written in English and the Spanish, and it was also witnessed, this is the consent form. So I will just read for you. It said, undersigned understand perfectly that in the case of development of yellow fever in him, that he endanger his life to certain extent, but it being entirely impossible him to avoid the infection during his stay in this island, he preferred to take the chance of contracting it intensely in the belief that he will receive from the Reed Commission the greatest care and the most skillful medical services. So this was a consent which the this army, mostly the army personnel and even his colleagues, Reed's colleague, they have to sign. And what incentive they have given? They have given $100 or equivalent gold, and if somebody contact that yellow fever, 100 more dollar was given. So what are the problem with this consent form? What are the ethical difficulties? I mean, it looks very obvious. There were coercion was there. There excessive compensation, and it doesn't mention like they can withdraw from the this study. Means they were told as it is you are going to get the yellow fever. That's why you have to participate in the study. So this was in the in the 1900, and after that, in the bill was passed in the Senate, in which they said, there should be a clear cut, like people should explain what research they are going to do, and they should not include the children, pregnant woman, and the elderly person. So this was one of the infamous experiment after which uh, these changes has taken place. uh, this was another just this was another infamous. It was most of us know it's a Tuskegee syphilis study, and it was done in it was study of the course of the syphilis which was untreated in the Negro male. Here you can see what are the ethical problem you can make out with the these three lines also, and I will just go further. This was conducted in by the US Department of Public Health from 1930 to 1970. I mean, before starting of the World War II, and even it was going on till 1970. And the large number of the black male, poor, uneducated with syphilis, receive SAM treatment without their knowledge. I mean, they are not told you are going receiving just a placebo. I mean, it is not a treatment, but in fact, they were told you are receiving the treatment for this syphilis with the stated purpose of studying the course of advanced stage of the disease. And what happened? At least 40 died from the treatable condition, especially when the penicillin like invented, which was the treatment of choice. In fact, we can say that after the invention of the penicillin, the syphilis has gone actually, and there was no consent and not informed. A known effective treatment was withheld, that is injectable antibiotic penicillin, and this violated the Nuremberg Code. Actually, Nuremberg Code was formulated after the infamous Nazi experiment, which was done on this during the World War II on the Jews and the prisoner of war. Even they have not followed the and this code came in 1947, and still they have not followed this their guideline, and uh, and not stopped even after the war crimes trial that was for the Nazis. And there were even promises of funeral benefit, and as I told you, the effective treatment arose in the course of study but not made available to the subject. And in 1972 there was news published uh, in New York Times. After that, the whole world got aware of what is happening. And even in 1966, one scientist from the same group has written to the CDC, see, this is what is happening to these black people. What the CDC say? They said, no, we'll continue the treatment, and we'll see the what is the end result. That is what is the how many people died, and we'll see what happened to their autopsy actually. So this was the view of CDC in 1966. And but after this report, what happened? The US has formed a National Commission for Protection of Human Subject in Biomedical and Behavioral Research. So it was one of the pioneer work by them to protect the human subject. And it was more famously known as the Belmont report. What they have said, they identify the three basic principles of the uh, human research. What are those three? The respect for the person, and it should be beneficence. We should have a regard, and we should think of the patient, and the justice. So this is the most important three principle for any in conducting the any study. And so now we come to our main topics, like informed consent. As I said, it is required for any type of the study, mainly when you are doing the prospective study, whether it is an intervention and whether it is without intervention. So we have to take the consent of the subject. The informed consent, it should be voluntary agreement to participate in the research. So word voluntary is very important. It is not merely a form. It is not like just signing a document, but it is a process in which the subject understand the research and its risk. I mean, we have to make, like, as a investigator or as a doctor or as a researcher, it is our duty to make the subject understand what we are going to do, what is the risk and the benefit. And informed consent is essential before enrolling the participant and ongoing once enrolled. And this informed consent must be obtained from all type of the human subject. As I told you, whether it is diagnostic, we are doing some procedure to see the course of the disease or type of the disease, and whether it is therapeutic or it is interventional, we are giving some drug or some intervention we are doing, whether it is a social or behavioral disease. It is it's a simple thing, but still we should explain to the subject what we are going to do, and for the research conducted domestically or abroad, so anywhere. So informed consent is the important part of any research. And obtaining the consent involve informing the subject about his or her right, like what is the subject's right and purpose of studies, procedure to be undergone, and the potential risk and benefit of the participation. So these are the basic thing we have to explain to the subject. In the study must participate willingly. This is the most important. He should not be forced to participate in the study. And we have to take the extra care regarding the vulnerable population, like prisoner, children, and pregnant women or elderly person more than 80 years. So what should be the goal of the informed consent? To provide the sufficient information so that the participant can make an informed decision about whether or not to enroll in a study or to continue the participation. We have to give the full information regarding the research. And this document must be, it should be written in the simple language so the participant or subject can understand. And it must minimize the possibility of coercion or undue influence. It, we should not make a research, or we should not create a situation like the person is forced to take the study, and the subject must be given sufficient time to consider the participation. So why do we need the consent? It is a legal and ethical consideration. And it is way to minimize the potential harm mainly to the subject and avoid the unfair and exploitation. We have seen so many examples. So to minimize this any exploitation, the informed consent is very important. Also to protect the patient's right. So what are the component of the informed consent process? Like many of most of us doing some kind of research, we know that there are two part of the informed consent process. One is the participant information document, in which there is a detail about the regarding the your research project, what you are going to do, how you are going to do, and many more details are there. Other is the consent form on which the subject sign and when he is agree for doing the research. So it has a two component. Sometimes it's called PID, or some people call PIS, and other is the consent form. So what is this process? Like it must be presented to enable the person to voluntarily decide whether or not to participate as a research subject. So we should give the sufficient time for a person to read regarding that document regarding the research, so he can decide voluntarily. Informed consent process must be dialogue of study purpose, duration, experiment procedure, alternative, risk and benefit. So these things the investigator or co-investigator should able to explain to the subject, like how long the this experiment will go on, what you are going to do, and suppose what will happen, I will not take part in the research, are there any risk is there, any benefit is there. So these things should be clearly tell to the subject. And the process of consenting is ongoing and must be made clear to the subject. I mean, it is ongoing. It's not like once he has signed the consent, he has to take part in the study for, like, suppose studies for 2 years. It doesn't mean he has to take for the 2 years. He can withdraw anytime he feel he is not he's not feeling he should continue. It is totally on the will of the subject. And location where the consenting will discuss, the subject physical, emotional and psychological capability must be taken into consideration when consenting the human subject. I mean, environment we saw it quite friendly. It should not be like you are forcefully, you are coercing the subject. That thing we have to take care. And informed consent process should ultimately assure that the subject understand and really get what they are signing up for. I mean, before signing, he should be very sure what he's signing for. It is important because if he's not understanding, he may, after few days he may withdraw. I mean, then your this compliance of the study subject will be very less. So there is a dropout rate will be more. So this is also an important aspect as far as the investigator is concerned. So what elements should be included in informed consent, like those document, what should be there? And as I told you, they need to be given the enough information to provide a truly voluntary and informed consent. There should be a language which always state that this is a totally voluntary, and you read it and you decide it. Subject must provide the following information: what is the purpose of the research, what are the procedure involved, what is the alternative if I don't take part in this study, what should be the alternative, and any risk, any discomfort, like in in some study there is suppose they are doing the ascitic fluid tapping, then they should be mentioned like some needle is going to puncture in your abdomen, fluid is going to be taken, and there will be some pain. I mean, it's totally, it should be described each and every word, and so that the subject can understand. benefit of the research to the society and possibly to individual of the human subject. The subject has a right to know कि suppose I am taking part in the study, is it beneficial to me, it is beneficial to society, and you are able to explain that. That is the important thing. Otherwise the person will think, why should I take part in the study? Length or time uh, subject is expected to participate, and also the how many times he has come to the hospital for this particular study. Person to contact for answer to question or element of research related injury or emergency. This is very important. When you are giving the document to the subject, you should tell like whom to contact if some emergency happen. Not even that. Uh, I mean the name of the person whom to contact should be printed on that participant information document. Statement indicating that participant is voluntary, that refusal to participate will not result in any consequences or any loss of benefit that the subject is otherwise entitled to receive. It means we should clearly tell the subject, even if we don't take part in the study or even if we withdraw from the study, his treatment will not be hampered, and he's not there is not going to be any harm. It not ki we are not going to follow you, or we are not going to favor you. So these things should be very clearly in the informed consent form. Statement regarding the subject right to confidentially and right to withdraw from the study at any time without any consequences. uh, the additional information should be there. What if something goes wrong? I mean, patient will ask, and you have to state also that ki what is going to happen if some emergency comes, if I am become ill, who is going to take care, as I previously said, whom I am going to contact. So these things should be clearly written in the informed consent process. And who is organizing and funding the research trial, this should be also mentioned in the informed consent form. Payment for the participation, this is mainly applicable for the clinical trials or the mainly the pharma funded trials, in which what happened, I mean they have a provision of covering the wages loss. If the patient is coming from the far away and staying for 1 or 2 days, then you can compensate with the uh, uh, wages loss they have incurred over 1 day or 2 days. Similarly, you should also able to state that if some emergency arise, then the company who is like funding the project will provide the cover for the treatment. Also, if there is something mishappening or some permanent damage happen, and there is a provision of compensation as per the guideline of the DCGI, and time to time even the Supreme Court has given the various formula to calculate the compensation, that we have to state in the consent form and also have to tell the patient. uh, if any risk is there involved with the embryo, fetus and pregnancy, usually one thing is very clear in the clinical trial. Patient who are having very high risk for damage usually should not be taken for the clinical trial. But if you are taking, suppose a patient, some pregnant female you are taking, then you have to clearly tell them what happened to the fetus. So these things you have to keep in the mind. Circumstances for the investigator withdrawing the subject, this I told you previously. Statement regarding the how significant new finding will be communicated, like what are you going to do, some suppose some new finding comes, whether suppose is there any going to change the treatment, are you going to take care for him over few years. So these things you have to communicate to the subject. And also like this, suppose this particular research is you are conducting, or particular drug trial you are conducting, you have to tell the subject like it is conducted over how many sites, and how many patients are you are enrolling at your site, and you are enrolling from the other side also, and how many total subject you are enrolling in this clinical trial. So this information also you have to uh, give to the subject. And probability of random assignment of the placebo treatment, this is also very important. You have to tell the subject, suppose you are doing some placebo controlled trial, probably on by chance you may receive the treatment also, or you may receive just placebo, I mean no treatment or standard treatment. So time to time the government of India and other bodies issue some extra guideline to take care of the subject. Like in this, you can see the you have to also state that the possibility of the investigational product to provide the intended therapeutic effect. Failure of investigational product to provide the intended therapeutic effect. Suppose you are doing some drug trial, then you have to tell the subject also, you have to write in the consent form, probably this drug may not be effective at all. So let him decide what he want to do, whether he want to come in the trial or not. Regarding the same thing as I told you regarding the placebo administered to subject shall not have any therapeutic effect. So this thing you have to tell clearly to the subject and let the subject decide whether to continue in the trial or not. Other important thing, this come from the World Medical Association, that in any clinical trial, placebo usually should not be given. At least they should be given the standard treatment when you are doing the randomized trial with the placebo. Uh, it is not that they should not be given any treatment at all. Similarly, there should be some more additional information, like whether the study involve the DNA banking and genetic material, you have to tell separately, and you have to take the separate consent for, or you have to add the separate line in the consent form for this. And I'll never withheld any information about the risk involved in the clinical trial, and always truthful answer to be given to direct questioning by the subject. And and new consent needed for any use for which the consent not obtained explicitly. This is mainly for the any drug trial. Suppose something new information has come, and which is harmful to the subject, or you want to do some study for the, in the same study you want to do some group of the patient, some different parameter you want to test. So you have to explain the subject, and you have to take the fresh consent, we are going to do this thing again, whether you are willing to continue or not. Regarding the language, this is also important. Consent must be clearly written and understandable to the subject, and it should be non-technical. It should not be the scientific language. It should be like comparable what is language is usually in the newspaper or journal circulation magazine. And as I told you, the scientific, technical, and medical terms should be defined or explained in the lay terms. And it is often recommended that the informed consent be written at the 8th grade reading level. So the even the common person understand very easily. When enrolling the minor in a study, related recruitment material must be reflect the reading level of the minors. It should be very simple so that the child can understand. Other important thing, consent must be provided in the language of the subject, or alternatively a translator, and short form can be used. The short form is a type of informed consent used when there is a language barrier, or English IC approved consent form is orally translated in the subject of the native language. Important thing here now, whatever your form, consent form using, whether you have make the short for the some lay person, or so important thing that should be the approved by the institutional ethics committee. You should not use any form or any informed consent which is not approved by the institutional ethics committee. So this is the informed consent to what we used here. In the last you can see the I mean always thanks the participant for taking part in the study, and the PI signature, name and date is written. And other important thing which I told you, this form should have a name of the PI, address, phone number, also the name of the member secretary of the ethics committee, and address and the telephone number. So for any emergency or for any dispute, the subject can contact PI or even the ethics committee. In regarding some special population about the consent form, uh, consent is usually uh, taken more than 18 years. Patient's guardian, uh, or patient's usually when the patient's guardian sign when the subject is minor, and assent when the when the child of the age 8 to 18 sign the form, that is called the assent form. It should be in the simple language. Okay. Then for decisionally impaired, it may be cognitive impaired, unconscious, mentally disabled, or temporarily impaired, informed consent should be happen with the next of the kin or legally authorized representative. And when possible, the participant assent should be obtained, and maybe after the research related activity has occurred in the case of participant who are temporarily impaired. I mean, if some person is unconscious and the some study is going on, you take the consent from the legally authorized representative. But when the patient's conscious regain, you have to sign, you have to get the sign from him also. So another very important thing, the waiver of the consent, and this is also um, uh, many times we do ask from the ethics committee. So from whom we can ask for the waiver of the consent? So it is waived, it is justified that the research involved not more than the minimal risk. I mean, almost no risk is involved, or when the participant and the researcher do not come into the contact, or when it is necessary in the emergency situation. So like situation when the you are reviewing some the old record, you are not coming in the contact with the subject, so you can ask for the waiver of the consent. Or you are doing some research on the stored sample, blood sample, so you can ask, in such situation you can ask for the waiver of the consent. And if the such study have protection in the place are for both privacy and confidentiality and do not violate the right of the participant, then ethics committee can waive off the requirement of the informed consent. In emergency situation also, if it is necessary, like if some emergency situation come, we may there is no time to take the consent, then waiver of consent can be given by the institutional ethics committee. So who can take the consent? Usually the qualified person like investigator, co-investigator, who know about the uh, research procedure, risk benefit, and he who can answer the question and discuss the alternative, and who can give the consent. Obviously the subject or subject's legally authorized representative. These are the only two people who can give the consent. And the party responsible for the informed consent are the ethics committee, who review the informed consent. If there is some fault or some lacunae are there, they can suggest, sponsor, and who is all sponsoring the study also responsible for the anything happening with the subject, and he is legally responsible. Investigator is also legally responsible for anything happening in the clinical trial. So these three people are the responsible person for the informed consent. So as told you, the role of the ethics committee is to modify the consent form if it is not satisfying, and always the investigator advised to give or administer the consent form which was approved by the institutional ethics committee. So this is the consent form which is signed by the uh, subject, either the title, name, qualification, occupation, name and address, and nominees and all these are there for mainly for the compensation issues. And also you can see whether the sample is want to stored for future research, that is also separately you have to mention. So this is the prototype of consent form. Just single slide regarding the audio visual recording. So India was the first country where the audio visual recording was started in, I think, in 2013. Initially it was like order came from the Supreme Court and it was for the every subject, but subsequently it was modified. Now this audio video recording is mainly for the vulnerable subject, like you can say like a pregnant female, or subject coming from the prison, or elderly subject. On only audio recording, like person with the having the disease with the HIV or the leprosy, whom the anti-HIV and the anti-leprosy drugs are trials are they have to try. So these are the some example of where the audio visual consenting is required. So the most important thing is documentation, and it is said that if it is not written, it means it did not happen. So document what happened as well as what did not happen. You have to very meticulously you have to write and you have to document each and everything, if it is even the positive or the negative thing both. So just to summarize, respect for the person is manifest in the expectation of a meaningful informed consent process, and Indian regulation emphasize the need for written informed consent, audiovisual recording in vulnerable subject, and the element to be included in the consent process. When aimed at enhancing the protection of subject, modification to be informed consent process can be authorized by the Institutional Ethics Committee. So, thank you for your patient hearing.
Thank you, Dr. Subhash. So we're running late for the third session. Maybe we can take it the next time if we start a bit early. Dr. Ravindran, I'd like to close the session with your comments, and there any burning questions, we could take them or we could reserve them for next time.
Thank you very much. I think it was a fantastic session and a really great presentation by Dr. Vikas Agrawal, Chengappa, Dr. Yadav, and you, Latika. It might seem a bit boring, these topics, the ethics of biomedical publications, but these are extremely important in current scenario in terms of the whole conduct of medical academic publishing. So I hope people who could spare time to listen to this, which we believe an extremely important part of publication related science, as we may call it, would really have been benefited from these excellent talks. So I would like to thank and congratulate all the speakers today. Thank you.
Thank you all and good night, and see you next Wednesday.